At the beginning of the 20th century, two men changed the world forever with a single invention. Wilbur and Orville Wright were not your typical brainiacs, and most importantly, lacked the funding and resources that most previous inventors had. With little help from anyone, the Wright brothers gradually became world famous and made a name for themselves that would last for our entire existence.
Finding an interest in aeronautics at an early age, Wilbur and Orville dedicated much of their life to crafting the first airplane. These brothers were not pursuing fame, riches, or glory that might come with this achievement, but what drove them was a greater sense of purpose.
Which we benefit enormously. And we owe them far more gratitude than we're commonly used to expressing or that is commonly taught. And when we also understand how hard they worked, and these two brothers are a perfect example of that. It wasn't just that they were brilliant, but they worked extremely hard and never, ever let failure, setbacks, disappointments, near-death incidents stop them from pursuing what they intended to accomplish. They had purpose, high purpose. I don't mean that as a bad pun, high purpose. And this in itself was their way of finding happiness. They were never happier than when they were on the job, and particularly when the job was getting tough. And they weren't in it to make life easier or softer or to get rich or any of those things. They're pursuing a wonderful, ambitious, admirable achievement. And they did it alone, without any backing. No backing from a university, no money or support from a foundation, no wealthy benefactor, no pull in high places, no political pull, and no money.
During the early 1900s, cars were becoming more popular and transportation was transforming the U.S. Henry Ford had just founded his own car company, Ford Motors. Although cars were somewhat new, the Wright brothers were still eager to find a better, long-distance form of transportation.
The U.S. government had been spending thousands of dollars in an effort to make the ideas of Professor Langley, an aviation pioneer, a reality, while two brothers of Ohio quietly perfected their invention.
The Wright brothers' first flight marked a change in the world and started a new wave of transportation, all during a time of industrial improvement.
Wilbur and Orville are practically inseparable. They were born perfectionists and natural mechanics as they could do anything they put their hands to.
The brothers are described as natural workmen, having invented, constructed, and operated their gliders and eventually their Wright Flyer jointly, all at their own personal expense. Each brother is due equal credit. The brothers maintain an intense seriousness during work with a burning passion to succeed.
John T. Daniels, a photographer for the Wright brothers, stated, "They built their own camp, they took an old carbide can and made a stove out of it. They took a bicycle and geared the thing up so they could ride it on the sand. They did their own cooking and washing, and they were good cooks too." Many people viewed the Wright brothers as a pair of poor nuts because they'd stand on the beach for hours watching gulls flying.
Their journey to aviation officially started when their father, Milton, who was a traveling minister, brought home a toy rubber band helicopter. The brothers instantly grew an interest in the aeronautical model.
The brothers always had the dream of making an airplane. Orville's first teacher in grade school, Ida Palmer, would remember him at his desk tinkering with bits of wood and asked him what he was up to. He told her he was making a machine of a kind that he and his brother were going to fly someday.
Their house in Dayton, Ohio had no running water or electricity, and both brothers lacked a high school diploma and a college education. Although they were not fortunate in this manner, they did have many books and spent a lot of their time reading.
Even though both brothers lacked a formal high school education, their display of knowledge and the will to learn can be seen in their letters of correspondence. In these letters, the brothers use an intricate set of vocabulary as well as displaying deep thinking.
Orville dropped out of high school to start his own printing business. Eventually, he ended up building his own printer and created several publications, including The Midget, a small school newspaper, church pamphlets, and the Dayton Tatler.
Wilbur, after being badly injured in a hockey game, knocking out his upper front teeth, fell into depression for several years and spent this time educating himself by reading books in his dad's library. Here he grew his interest in aviation. He did not want to talk to anyone outside of his house and passed up on going to Yale. This event changed history since it rerouted a new path for Wilbur.
Orville was seen to be the genius of the two, but a shy person who tended to be depressed often, while Wilbur, being older, was the leader who set their path.
The Wright brothers became even more interested in flight after reading the glider experiments of Otto Lilienthal, a German engineer.
Along with their assistant in their bike shop, they created an aluminum engine, which no one had created before. Finances were a struggle since their only source of money was from their previous bike shop. They spent about $1,000 in total.
John T. Daniels lived on the beach where the brothers did their flight attempts and watched them over several years as they mastered the art of aeronautics. Daniels states, "I never saw men so wrapped up in their work in my life. They had their whole heart and soul into what they were doing. When they were working, we would come around and stand right over them. They wouldn't pay any more attention to us than if we weren't there at all."
The brothers were able to construct the first airplane by imitating the movement of the wings of gulls. They would stand on the beach for hours watching the gulls and imitating the movements of the gulls, causing people to think they were crazy. They became incredibly good at these imitations.
The brothers believed the best way to experiment was to actually fly their models themselves and get a first-person view. They would always only fly one of them in the plane at one time, so if one were to die, they could continue their dream. Every time one of the brothers would get ready to fly, they would shake hands and hold on to each other's hands like they hated to let go. They knew every time they made a new attempt, they were risking their lives. The brothers worked extremely hard and only let failure encourage them to improve. Despite major setbacks and near-death experiences, they never gave up. Orville was nearly killed when a propeller broke while he was testing an airplane.
Before their first flight at Kitty Hawk, they had never maintained a flight for more than a minute, but that was about to change. December 17th, 1903 marked the date of their first flight. Their first trial was done at 10:35 in the morning with almost 30 miles per hour winds. The brothers failed but didn't give up, and they repaired a minor flaw in about 30 minutes. At 11:20, they made their second trial, traveling approximately 175 feet through the air. The brothers made their third attempt at 11:40 and got to their highest height of 12 to 14 feet off the ground. The fourth attempt marked the most successful. It started off with the plane's usual ups and downs, but they ended up traveling over 850 feet with improved control. In total, the flight lasted 59 seconds. After their successful flight, they laid down their plane next to a building, and a sudden gust of wind struck the machine. The engine legs were all broken off, the chain guides badly bent, a number of uprights, and nearly all the rear ends of the ribs were broken. The machine was totally wrecked, so the brothers packed it up in pieces and sent it back to Dayton. They gave their crowd of onlookers a few pieces as souvenirs.
A general invitation was sent to people living within 6 miles of the flight location, but they were doubted by most, so very few people showed up.
There were only 5 known people present at the Wright brothers' first powered machine flight, along with a little crowd of fisher folks and Coast Guards who attempted to keep up with the plane during its first flight by running with it across the sand.
The day after their groundbreaking flight, the Kitty Hawk newspaper read, "The problem of aerial navigation without the use of a balloon has been solved at last. Like a monster bird, the invention hovered above the breakers and circled over the rolling sandhills at the command of its navigator, and after soaring for 3 miles, it gracefully descended to earth again and rested lightly upon the spot selected by the man in the car as a suitable landing place." The Wright brothers soon broke their own record and traveled at a top speed of 31 miles per hour, became the first plane to exceed a total distance of 1,000 feet. Orville went on to accomplish a flight lasting over 40 seconds on the Huffman Prairie in Dayton, Ohio. He traveled 1,760 feet and flight above the treetops. This was the Wright brothers' 85th flight attempt.
Orville wasn't satisfied after his first flight and kept doing new runs until he had eventually accomplished a flight of 3 miles. He gracefully put the machine through all kinds of maneuvers and landed it smoothly like a big bird in its chosen spot.
The Wright brothers faced constant rejection. They were rejected by the U.S. government 4 times after being rejected by Scientific America. Not until 1909 did the U.S. government finally purchase a plane from the Wright brothers.
Only in 1910 did they finally feel comfortable and confident enough flying together. This proved their creation was finally ready for the world. The Wright brothers set the standard for controlled flight and was the first step toward modern flight. Millions of people fly every day and do not acknowledge how amazing it is. They opened up opportunities for business, military, and everyone in the world. Without controlled and powered flights, certain parts of the world would be isolated, and it would take much longer to transfer products, as boat would be the fastest mode of transportation.
The Wright brothers found a passion for aeronautics and created the first controlled and powered flight during the early 1900s with scant resources and education, but a relentless and perfectionist mindset.